Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 2 of my Texas Sports mini podcast, where we break down and analyze everything that has to do with Texas athletics once or twice weekly here on the Raw Prospect Podcast YouTube channel. Today, in particular, I will be discussing Texas basketball and their huge win, their signature win against Kansas that came on Monday night in what was a fantastic game. I was at the Irwin Center. It was probably the best, if not one of the best, top 3 for sure, environments that I've ever experienced in my time here at Texas at any sporting event. It was that electric. The environment, the fans were great, and that ultimately propelled us to a signature win against Bill Self in Kansas, our third straight victory against Bill Self's squad at Kansas, the longest such winning streak for any Big 12 team against Kansas since Bill Self took over as the head coach back in, I believe, 2007, 2008, whenever that was. So very impressive for Texas. We're going to break it down. I'm going to tell you my takeaways from that game. It was a 3-point victory for Texas, 79-76, a comeback at the end. Very good late game execution. We're going to talk about that. And then I will preview Texas' upcoming matchup against the struggling, reeling Baylor team that's still ranked in the top 10, still very good, but they've been struggling for the past couple weeks, dealing with some injuries and all that. But we're going to preview that game, which will take place Saturday morning, 11 a.m. at Baylor. So a nice road test now for Texas as they've built up some momentum here since the loss to Texas Tech early last week. So let's just go ahead and get into it. The first thing I want to say is, as I mentioned in the beginning of this podcast, the environment in the Irwin Center, and I was there, was electric. Every time Texas made a run, and they did so frequently, and, they controlled the game for most of it. Kansas took an early lead, but Texas made their fair share of runs. Every time we made a run, the crowd got on its feet and was chanting defense. They were loud on the defensive end of the floor, loud when Texas made three-pointers, which wasn't very often, but the crowd was just amazing, and it was one of the best environments that I've ever experienced at a Texas sporting event. And yes, that does include everything that I've been to: volleyball, football, and basketball. This was one of the best that I've ever seen. It was loud. It was electric. People got excited when they made runs. And then, of course, at the end, students rushed the court. I did not. I was sitting in the upper level, but students did rush the court, and Texas did get fined for the way that they handled that. But nonetheless, that has nothing to do with the game. Let's talk about the actual game now. The first thing that stood out to me was the play of one Timmy Allen, the all Pac-12, first team all Pac-12 transfer from the University of Utah. Okay? He was absolutely fantastic. And he finally emerged with his best game yet here at the University of Texas for this basketball team. He emerged as the best player on the floor in this game. And there were two things in particular that Timmy Allen did, in this game to stand out. First of all, he was the catalyst offensively. When Texas fell down early, he brought them back. And he found offense in unconventional ways that you don't typically see now, very frequently in today's style of basketball, whether it's at the NBA level, college level, or high school. If you did not watch the game, Timmy Allen was generating shots whenever he wanted to in the mid-range, knocking down mid-range jumpers at an efficient rate. And his decision-making and shot selection was really good. He took the shots that were open, and he took the shots that he knew he was capable of making. One of the weaknesses for Timmy Allen so far this season at the University of Texas, okay, in his first season here, has been his ball handling and his inability to control the basketball when dribbling and attacking off the dribble. There were a lot of issues early with turnovers with Timmy Allen. But in this game, he was very smart with the ball, hitting his pull-up mid-range jumpers, which you don't see a lot in college basketball or in any style of basketball nowadays. He was very effective in the mid-range. He was unbelievable. He was a mid-range maestro, and he hit the go-ahead shot with about 16 seconds left from the right elbow. It was wet, as they like to say in basketball. He was absolutely fantastic the entire game, start to finish. He led them back when they fell down early, and he finished the game, was real smart with the ball. He took care of the ball, and he was just super efficient at creating offense in the mid-range. He's not a great three-point shooter. He can knock it down occasionally, but that's not his strength. His strength is in the mid-range, and he was very effective. 24 points on 11 of 17 from the field. You just don't see that kind of efficiency very often nowadays, especially in college basketball, from these types of players, these high-volume scorers. So mid-range was very impressive for Timmy Allen. He was the guy in this game. Okay, the best player on the floor. But mid-range was not the only way that he was able to generate offense. The other valuable thing that Timmy Allen did that contributed to Texas's best game offensively against a real team, okay, so far this season, scoring 79 points, was his movement without the basketball, cutting to the basket, moving without the basketball, getting open on back screens, okay, cutting on the baseline, getting layups, and finishing through contact. That was critical in the success of Texas's offense all night long in what was a highly contested game. Back and forth, if you watch the game. Okay, there were points in this game where I thought it was for sure going to end up going into overtime. But Timmy Allen being effective in the mid-range, 11 out of 17 field goals, 24 points. And his movement without the basketball, cutting to the basket, off back screens, down screens, baseline, finishing through contact when he got the opportunity, knocking down his free throws, which is another thing that he has struggled with this season. He was just all around fantastic and the best player on the floor and the guy that drove Texas's offense in this game and their success. He was fantastic. Can't really say a lot bad about Timmy Allen after that performance. I mean, that was a virtuoso performance by Timmy Allen. Okay? He was the catalyst of their offense. Okay. Let's move to my second takeaway. The defense on Ochai Obagi. If you don't know who Ochai Obagi is, Ochai Obagi for Kansas, the shooting guard or the small forward, he plays both positions. He's one of the best, I would say, top 10 for sure players in college basketball. And he, coming into this game, was the leading, and he still is, but he was the leading scorer in the Big 12. In my opinion, no bias, in my opinion, it's close. The SEC has really climbed as of late. But in my opinion, the Big 12 is the best conference, top to bottom, in terms of depth in college basketball. Okay, you're going to see 7 or 8 teams for sure from the Big 12 get into the NCAA tournament. Okay, and one of the teams, Oklahoma State, is ineligible. So you really only have 9 eligible teams for the postseason in the Big 12. And you're going to see 7 or 8 of those for sure in the tournament. Okay? This guy, Ochai Obagi, he's the best player on the best team in the Big 12 in Kansas. Some people will say it's Texas Tech. That's a different conversation for another day. We're not going to get into that here. Okay? But he is the leading scorer and the leader in a bunch of statistical categories, okay, in the Big 12, one of the best conferences in college basketball. Came into this game averaging 21 points per game. But the defense of Texas, their plan, okay, to limit him to 11 points, one of his lower scoring output games of the season, on only 4 out of 7 shooting, okay, to plaster him defensively was amazing and one of the reasons that Texas won this game. I still think, and there are a lot of people who are now doubting Kansas, their physicality, their ability to win when Ochai Obagi doesn't play well. I still believe that Kansas is a very good team. Maybe still the best team in the Big 12 when they play their best version of basketball. I still believe that. And David McCormick, he played this game, but he seemed a little hobbled. I don't think he was fully healthy. But when they're at full strength and Ochai Obagi plays well, which he typically does, I still think Kansas is a national championship caliber team, in my opinion. But what Courtney Ramey did in particular, we talked about Timmy Allen on the offensive side of the basketball. Courtney Ramey was the key cog defensively on the wing, guarding Ochai Obagi one-on-one for much of this game. And he was absolutely fantastic. It was one of the best individual defensive performances that I've ever seen. Ever. NBA or college. He was fantastic, plastering him, not fouling, getting steals, being disruptive. He was just absolutely fantastic. You have to go back and watch the game to actually see what Courtney Ramey was able to do. Chris Beard, the head coach, raved about it in his post-game press conference. Okay, Courtney Ramey, a guy who's not particularly known for his defense. If you know anything about Texas basketball, he's known for his ability to create shots off the dribble and knock down three-pointers at a high clip. But his defense on Ochai Obagi and the leadership that he displayed defensively, communicating with others, was a key cog in this Texas victory and their upset of Kansas. This is a big win for Texas. Huge. They can now say, okay, well, we had some good wins. We beat Tennessee, who's, upper echelon team in the SEC, still ranked within the top 20, top 25. We beat Iowa State, who's still a really good team, going to make the NCAA tournament. Started the season undefeated, went undefeated in non-conference, has since struggled a little bit in the Big 12, but they're still a very good basketball team when healthy. Okay, and we absolutely dominated them. We have some other decent wins. Okay, but this win right here, this is the signature one that you point to. Beating, as I said, Still, when they're at full strength and Ochai, Obagi, and Christian Braun play well, I think Kansas is still probably the best team in the Big 12 and still a national championship caliber, Final Four caliber team. But the defense of Courtney Ramey, particularly on Ochai Obagi, holding the leading scorer in the Big 12 to 11 points on only 7 shots, not allowing him to get his shot off, not making it easy, being disruptive. Absolutely key. One of the best individual defensive performances I have seen in a long time. That's number 2. The final thing I will say about this game and about this Texas victory, final takeaway, I thought the Texas front court, which has been their weakness, inconsistent at times, has been exposed at times. Texas front court was fantastic at dictating the tempo of this game. Absolutely fantastic. We start with Trey Mitchell offensively, scoring 17 points, very effective from the field, dominating down low. They were feeding him early, absolutely feeding him early, and he was being quick with his decisions, but he was also very effective, touch around the rim, making post moves against the defense of David McCormick. A very good defender. Trey Mitchell and his inside post game, mid post game, was great this game. His ability to dominate down low, was fantastic. And then Christian Bishop. Versatility defensively with Christian Bishop. His defense on the pick and roll, was absolutely fantastic. And his defense at the rim, blocking shots, was fantastic as well. I thought the court for Texas played a fantastic game. You can even include Timmy Allen in this discussion. We talked about him earlier, right? Timmy Allen and Trey Mitchell were initiating the offense. Whether it was, as I talked about earlier, Timmy Allen in the mid-range. He was a mid-range maestro, one of the virtuoso performances of this season, We know that's his strength. He's not really outside shooter, a good three-point shooter. He can knock it down occasionally, but that's not his strength. His strength, he played to his strengths this game, and he was the catalyst offensively, as we talked about earlier. 24 points, 11 of 17 from the field, very efficient, knocking shots down in the mid-range, and then his movement without the ball, whether it was cutting on down screens, cutting to the basket, cutting off the baseline, and his teammates' ability to find him around the rim and finish was absolutely fantastic. And then when he wasn't scoring, it was Trey Mitchell down low, the UMass transfer, who averaged over 18 points per game last season and is just starting to find his rhythm in the post. Now here at Texas. It was a fantastic duo here for Texas in this game against Kansas. And then, as I said, Christian Bishop, the transfer from Creighton, his defense, his versatility, and his ability to guard and switch on the pick and roll was fantastic for Texas in this game. I think he had 3 or 4 blocks that were absolutely crucial when you go back and watch the game. Rim protection has been a big issue for Texas. Christian Bishop, even though he's a little smaller for your typical forward, he can stretch the floor a little bit. He's a little more versatile, as I said. He was great defensively. So basically, I'll recap my takeaways, and then we'll move on as we're about 20 minutes in here on episode 2 of my Texas Sports mini podcast, part of the Raw Prospect Podcast YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe. But to recap my takeaways from this signature win against Kansas, much needed. Texas, as Emmy said, they're starting to find it offensively, and they're starting to build some momentum. And in college basketball, you don't want to play your best basketball in November, December. No, you want to be playing your best basketball early February, mid-February, going into March, going into conference tournaments, going into March Madness. That's when you want to be playing your best basketball. And all of a sudden, this Texas offense has exploded onto the scene, and their defense is getting the job done when it has to. Chris Beard has this team energized, and they're starting to find that mix of players that they like, the rotations and lineups that they like, something they struggled with early with a bunch of new guys, okay? That was expected. But real fast, to recap, and then we'll move on to the Baylor game coming this Saturday at 11 a.m. on ESPN2. Encourage you to watch it. Number 1, Timmy Allen, best player on the floor in this game, unquestionably. It wasn't even close. 24 points, 9 rebounds, 11 out of 17 from the field. Generating his offense, as I said, from the mid-range, knocking down shots. He hit the go-ahead jumper from the right elbow, absolutely wet with about 16 seconds left. He was a huge part in this game, generating offense from the mid-range and his movement without the basketball, one of his strengths as a basketball player, cutting to the rim off back screens, off down screens, in the baseline was fantastic, finishing around the rim, and he also knocked down his free throws, which was great to see. Number 2, the defense on Ochai Obagi, who, as I said, if you don't know who Ochai Obagi is, then you don't know college basketball, okay? When Ochai Obagi is on offensively, he can put up 40 anytime. Anytime. He's one of the best players, top 10 solidified players in college basketball. And coming into this game, he led the Big 12, which, as I said, I think still is the best, deepest conference in college basketball, top to bottom. Okay? 9 eligible teams to make the tournament. Oklahoma State's not eligible, okay, this season due to some allegations. Okay? But 9 teams eligible, and you're probably going to see about 7 of them make the NCAA tournament. Maybe 8, maybe, but definitely 6 or 7. Okay, I think it's the best conference in college basketball. The SEC is on the come up for sure. Okay, but I think the Big Ten's fantastic as well in its own right, but it's a little more top heavy. The bottom of that conference isn't as good, in my opinion. Okay. But the defense on Ochai Obagi, the leading scorer in the Big 12 by Courtney Ramey, the ability to plaster him, not allow him to get off his shot, was just great. Okay, one of the best individual defensive performances that I have seen in a long time. And then the front court for Texas, which has been highly criticized this season, dictated the tempo of the game, both offensively and defensively. Christian Bishop, his versatility on the defensive side, guarding pick and rolls, and then Trey Mitchell offensively, scoring 17 points, okay, and being efficient, scoring around the basket. Okay? Great win for Texas. Those are my takeaways. Let's move on to now Texas must shift its focus. Okay? They haven't been great on the road this year. It's been a big problem. They've been great at home. They haven't been great on the road. And so now we have to see if they can carry this momentum that they've created ever since the loss to Texas Tech. Okay? Beating Tennessee last weekend. Okay? Dominating a still very good team in Iowa State that went undefeated in non-conference. Has been ranked much of the season, okay, but has struggled a little bit as of late. Very talented team. And then now beating Kansas, their signature victory. Let me get a sip of water. Now we have to go to Baylor, Waco, against the struggling Baylor team. They just beat K-State tonight, which is good for them, Okay, that's a good victory. K-State, when they're at full strength, is a pretty good team. They might find a way to sneak into the tournament. But Baylor has been dealing with some injuries. James Akinho, the transfer from Arizona State, very talented. Okay. Flagler, some other guys have been dealing with injuries. They've been in and out of the lineup. And since they were ranked number 1 mid-January, Baylor's 5-4 in their last 9 games. Not great. They've been struggling a little bit. Were absolutely destroyed by Kansas last week. Okay? Embarrassing performance. But this is not a game Texas can take lightly, despite the struggles and some of the injuries that Baylor has. Okay? The first key to winning this game, I think, for Texas, you have to carry over what you did against Kansas and not turning the ball over. Baylor, defensively, although they're not as good as last year, are still very good and very keen at forcing turnovers. They force opponent turnovers, okay, at a top 10 rate right now in college basketball. And I know Texas is decent at it themselves, but they're not as good as Baylor. Adam Flagler, those guys on the perimeter can still get after it, disrupt in passing lanes, and, steal the basketball and get out in transition. You have to take care of the ball. Be smart like you were against Kansas. Only, I think it was 3 or 4 turnovers against Kansas. If they can do that and control the tempo, they will be very well set up, okay, to win this game. That's number 1. You have to win the turnover battle. It goes both ways, but particularly on offense, you have to do a good job of taking care of the basketball. It cannot be a careless game. Number 2, defensive rebounding. Okay? The guys on the interior for Baylor, Jonathan Chamachachua, Flo Thamba, and others, they're very adept at getting on the offensive glass and generating second chance points. You cannot let that happen if you are Texas. I need another performance like Kansas where you out-rebound them. And when you make stops, you got to get on the defensive glass and secure the basketball. If you don't, it could be trouble. Give Baylor's offense a ton of chances, you're going to be dead meat. You got to secure the basketball on the defensive glass. That's number 2. Okay? And then number 3, on offense, if you're Texas, you got to penetrate and play inside out. That's when this Texas offense is at its best. When Marcus Carr, Andrew Jones, and Courtney Ramey, the guards of this Texas basketball team, and others, can generate penetration into the paint and either find guys on the pick and roll, make passes off the dribble, or kick out for 3. You got to find ways to penetrate this Baylor defense. Okay? Play inside out. Play physical basketball on the offensive end. If you do those 3 things, Texas should emerge victorious in Saturday's game against a somewhat struggling Baylor basketball team that's still very talented, still a top 4 team in the Big 12, in my opinion. Okay? So to recap, to beat Baylor this weekend, Texas needs to not turn the ball over offensively. Baylor, as I said, top 10 in forcing opponent turnovers in the entire country. Texas is good at it itself, right? I think they're still top 30, top 40 in that category. But in order to win this game, you cannot allow Baylor to create momentum by forcing turnovers and getting out in transition. You will lose, okay? Do what you did against Kansas. Play smart on the offensive end. Be crisp with your passes, crisp with your decision-making, and do not turn the ball over, okay? Number 2, Defensive rebounding, going to be key. Do not let Flo Thamba and Jonathan Chamachachua and others, this front court for Baylor, get on the offensive glass and generate second chance opportunities for this Baylor offense. Can't happen. Okay? And number 3, you have to play an inside-out physical game offensively. Do what you did against Kansas. Have Marcus Carr, Courtney Ramey, and even Andrew Jones, okay, get dribble penetration into the paint where you can either find offense, okay, themselves or kick out for 3. That's where this Texas offense, okay, the shooters that they have, it works best if someone can penetrate on dribble penetration, okay, and then kick out for 3. Play inside-out type basketball. If you do those 3 things, Texas should win this game against Baylor and start building that resume, okay? They got the win against Tennessee last weekend. They got the win, a dominant home victory against Iowa State, okay? Still a very good team. They got the win against Kansas, the signature victory. They have now beaten Kansas 3 straight times in basketball dating back to last season. The only team ever to beat Kansas, only Big 12 team ever to beat Kansas 3 consecutive times, okay, since Bill Self took over as the Kansas head coach. Okay, that's very impressive. Let's continue that momentum now against Baylor. We can beat this team. Let's do it. You will see, start to build that momentum, start to build that resume, and climb the seed lines in bracketology. I think I've seen it. I've looked at a couple bracketologies yesterday, today, that have Texas as like the 4 or 5 seed line as of right now. Okay. It would be great, okay, to be a 4 or 5 seed. But I think in terms of expectations at the beginning of the season, Texas needs to be like a 2 or a 3 seed going into the tournament. And they have plenty of opportunities down the stretch to improve their resume and their seed line going into March. So let's do it. Do those 3 things that I said, and Texas basketball will be on its way to being very dangerous come tournament time. That is going to wrap it up for episode 2 of my Texas Sports Mini Podcast, part of the Raw Prospect Podcast YouTube channel. I will be back early next week. We will preview Texas baseball, which starts next weekend, and we'll probably talk some more basketball as well. We'll see you guys then. Go Texas, hook 'em horns, and let's beat Baylor.